Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming at you again for another fun-filled video on Film Fanatic. I want to thank everyone for the support. There's been some new subscribers and a couple of folks that have been leaving lots of comments, so that's been really cool. I love interacting with other people. The whole thing, is again, the whole main focus of this channel is just talking about the passion and the love I have for all things movies. Whether it's a director or a soundtrack that I really love. And I also try to mix things up with the channel where I've done some shows of where I'll do some music shows. I did a review for my I did my first concert review, and that was really fun. That was, it was fun doing the video. I never done that before. For me, music and film are just connected at the hip. And I've said many times before that films, like onto itself, movies onto itself, and just it being really my favorite art form is the most inspirational thing for me. And it also is for my band Quantum. It is the biggest inspiration. It really is. It's as well as your more typical things that inspire people to write music. Lots of other bands, lots of other artists that I am inspired by. One of the things too that really, really inspires me is live music. That's why I love to go see live music as much as I can. I've been going to a lot of local live music. There's been so much stuff going on. It's been wonderful. Now we're in the spring. We're a few weeks into the spring of 2023. But all through the winter, there was so much activity on that front. There's been probably 2 or 3 new venues that opened up during the winter of this year, and which to me, I still think about that as being, really surprising. But when I think about from the perspective of the business owners, on paper you think that's not a win-win situation, especially if you're in Maine and it's winter time. Winters can be really long. And typically, we live in a real seasonal place. It's a tourist state. It's a destination for people when they're on vacation. But for some reason, it just all kind of happened at the same time. And from what I gather, and what seems to be the outcome of that is that all these places that have been doing that decided to kind of launch doing music things during the winter, they've been pretty successful. And so I'm hoping that we'll keep going and continuing, with the warmer climate that we're sorta maybe in. It's a little bit cool now. It's 50 degrees, but it will get warmer, and obviously much warmer than it's been. It's been rainy. It's been pretty rainy and overcasty the last 3 days. But yeah, so it's pretty inspiring with all those things coming up. It's that or I should say all those things that have happened. We got some shows coming up here with Quantum, so I'm getting slowly getting ready for that stuff. I went to see my first big concert in a long time, which was Morbid Angel, and it was mind blowing. It was incredible. But I royally got my butt kicked in the mosh pit. I got pretty destroyed, and I hadn't been in a mosh pit in a long time, but it was super fun. And even though I'm still in pain and been kind of out of it. I've been keeping a pretty low profile the last couple of days. I've been on vacation, but I haven't really done too much. Saturday, I got was the concert, and and again, the concert was amazing, and it was better. Realistically, I knew it would be a great show, but it was better than I thought. The sound was incredible. They sounded amazing. I mean, I really think that Morbid Angel now sounds better than they ever have. It's a real interesting thing because they've been around for so long, and I just feel like they have so much fire and spark to their sound, and they were ferocious live. They were, and I love that they are a band that doesn't dwell in the past. Like they're really forging forward. I feel like all the time, and they're with this last tour, or with this tour that they're on now, they're really focusing on still on the more kind of current thing that they're doing, yet still playing some of the classics. But I think it's great that they're pushing forward. They're not relying on the staples of their pretty incredible catalog that they are for what they do are more or less bona fide hits. The people, the fans, critics, whatever, the songs or the tunes or the albums that people automatically, those are regarded as classics. And I think it's pretty awesome that they're not. They are paying homage to their other decades in the music industry, but that's not the focus. I think what they're doing is they're really focusing on what they're doing right now, and a big chunk of their set that they played was a lot of their newer tunes that they've been doing, and I think that's inspiring, and they're pushing forward, and I feel like they're doing some really interesting things. I think their last album that came out, well, it came out like 3 or 4 years ago now, uh, Kingdoms of Kingdoms of Disdain. When I first heard that album, I thought it was good. It was really good, but I wasn't. I don't know. It wasn't really. It didn't grab me like I thought it would. I wasn't sold on it right away. I thought it was really good. I thought it was brutal. I thought it had some real interesting, kind of progressive ideas, even. And since then, this past year, I was listening to some of the tracks here and there, and I found myself digging it more and more. And at the concert, I bought the album Kingdoms of Disdain, and I got a really nice edition of it. I got a digipack CD version of it, and I just think it's. And I've been listening to it since the concert, and I think it's kind of a masterpiece. I think it's a brilliant work of art. Really, I think it's heavier, it's more brutal, it's faster, and it also has even more of a groove factor at the same time. And it has this really progressive kind of edge, and it also has like this kind of psychedelic vibe to it. It's super trippy, and I think the whole thing about it is that they're not repeating themselves. They have established. Well, they helped to define, and I think they're probably, for my money, the most important band in the scene, and that is death metal. But they've always, it's always been known that they established their sound many years ago, and kind of their place in history. But what they're doing now is just, I feel like the last few years is taking that, but just moving forward and progressing and just pushing those boundaries. And I think it's a masterpiece. I think it's an amazing album, and I've been listening to it a lot since the show. And yeah, but since the show, I got home. I got home really late Saturday, or I should say Sunday morning. And like I said, I did a show on where I reviewed the concert, and I got really messed up, and it was a little bit terrible, a little bit scary, and but overall it was just just a completely insane fun time. And I'm overall glad I did it. I don't know if I do it again just because I like being able to walk around and not being in physical pain. It's getting better, but I got hit really hard in the pit in my back, super hard, and that's the thing that's killing me. And it's gotten better, slowly getting better. But I on Sunday I really didn't do anything. I did have to teach two lessons. I had two different drum students on Sunday, and then I did some cleaning around the house, and because I was gone for a whole day, so my house was kind of a mess. So I taught the two lessons, and then took a nap. I didn't really sleep very well on Sunday or Sunday morning, so took a big nap and ate some food. But I just kind of chilled out. I didn't really do anything. And then yesterday, Monday, was pretty rough in the morning. I was hurting bad, and I had to put a heating pad, and I just kind of relaxed for a good portion of the day, most of the morning, and I just kind of dealt with the pain. I put a heating pad on. I finally started taking some ibuprofen, and I started to feel better. I had plans to go to the movies. I was gonna go see I'm gonna go see it Wednesday. I'm definitely gonna go. I could have went to the movies last night, but I'm kind of glad I just took it easy. But I'm going to see the new Nicolas Cage movie, which I'm super excited. This new vampire movie, Renfield. Super excited to see. I've heard it's really awesome, so I'm going to see that tomorrow night. So I'll do a review for that. Huge Nicolas Cage fan. So I was going to go see it last night with a friend, but I was like, I don't know if I should really go out. So I ended up canceling, but I was feeling a little bit better. I started feeling better like in the mid to early afternoon, and I actually got some practicing in, which was great because I didn't get to practice before on Sunday at all. I just was like a waste. So I got to actually practice for a little while yesterday and then a little bit last night. So it was good. So hoping to do that a little bit more, easing back into it. But yeah, it was crazy. But anyway, so yesterday I did a big show on Manhunter. So I figured today I would do a review on one of the greatest movies, The Silence of the Lambs. Manhunter The Silence of the Lambs itself really is a franchise. Sometimes I forget that about certain movies. And when I did the review on Manhunter, I had done a review on Manhunter. Basically, I had just done I think I did a video. I might have done a video, but I know I did a review, like a post review on Manhunter on my Facebook page a while back, and I might have done a Facebook Live video, and I think I did. But I decided to do a video for this channel where I talked about Manhunter, and as I was like putting that together, I realized, oh wait, this is like a franchise, and there's quite a few movies in the franchise. There's a TV show. So after yesterday's show, I was like, okay, I should do Silence of the Lambs. So that's what I'm doing. And when I look at Silence of the Lambs as a franchise, and again, it was something that just kind of occurred to me. It's not really. I don't know. I think it's good, but not really. And in a lot of ways, I feel like there's a lot of inconsistent movies. You have Manhunter, which I did the review yesterday of, and I think that's a really great movie. I started watching it again last night. I think it's really creepy. It's a little bit dated at times, though, I will say. And most of the movies that I review and talk about and that I watch are from the 70s and 80s. And obviously, there's a big nostalgic thing for me with a lot of those movies, especially in the exploitation world. And obviously they're dated, but I feel like they're dated in this way that the it makes the films cool. Like they just have this extra pulpy, stylized kind of vibe to them, and I think it makes his films great. Or it's a another element that to me elevates the enjoyment of the experience. It's kind of weird, but that's kind of how I think about films that are, say, pick a exploitation movie from the '70s. It's like on paper, it's like, you know, it's kind of terrible, or technically, if you look at it how it was technically made, kind of terrible. But because it's kind of in its own way so extreme in its nature, it really works. At least for me, it does. It really works, and it adds to the the greatness of that film, or just the fun aspect, or the escapist element. It's a funny thing, but there's certain movies that obviously that maybe a movie's been out, and after it's been out for like say 10 or 15 years or 20 years, you watch it again and you're like, yeah, it's still great, or it's still really cool. It still kind of gets you, gets you going, or gets you excited. But there might be some real dated qualities to it that are kind of like, it's a little bit, makes it a little bit rough, and it doesn't really work in that same way. Where and I think that's attributed to, well, like, okay, for Manhunter, for instance, I think it's a great movie. I think it's awesome. It's super atmospheric. It's very creepy. There's a really great. There's a lot of tension to it. I think it's an awesome movie, and it's a Michael Mann movie, who I think in his heyday was an amazing director. So it's got this really highly stylized, slightly heightened reality kind of vibe to it. Michael Mann is known for having that kind of aesthetic, which I like, but he's got a very particular style. And I feel like the movie's very serious. Obviously, the subject matter, it's about this investigation to hunt down this notorious serial killer. And it came out in 1987, but to me it has certain things about it that are really dated, maybe with the music or the way a certain scene is kind of put together, like maybe like the dialogue, and the acting, or the editing, and the music, and the way it's kind of shot. Certain scenes, for me, it's really dated. And when I watch it, it almost takes me out of the movie a little bit. It's funny, and I think the reason is, and it's something I think about a lot, because I watch a lot of movies. Say, for instance, that, like, most people would regard as a pile of shit. Like, one example. Well, a lot of people think of Herschel Gordon Lewis's movies, who's one of my favorite directors, as just being just a pile of shit. Or another really great example would be this other amazing horror exploitation movie, Satan's Cheerleaders, which I did a review on. And they're, for all all intents and purposes, they're terrible movies, but I think it works. And I think about that, like, if I watch a movie that's come out in the late '80s or '90s, and it seems to be, I notice when it happens to me, it's usually a movie that's come out in the '80s or the '90s. It doesn't happen so much in other decades, but for some reason it happens in that period. And I think it might be because of, for certain films, the introduction to, like, right before CGI came out in blue screen, there was a lot of computer graphics. And some of those look really, really bad, and it's very dated, and I think that that's terrible, and sometimes that takes me out of the movie altogether. That's one aspect. Granted, Manhunter does not have CGI in it or any, like, computer graphics, but I think about that, like, why would that, certain aspects of that film, when I feel it's dated, take me kind of out of the film. But if I watch a really super gritty, low budget film from the 70s or the 60s or the 80s, and if it's a movie I dig and all, and in comparison, technically that movie is way worse. Why does that work for me in that context? And I don't know, and I think about that. It's interesting. I probably think about shit that most people don't think about or probably should think about. But I think about that a lot, and I think, like, for example, with Manhunter, I think it's because one of the reasons that might happen is it obviously it's a serious subject movie, serious subject matter, and the movie is meant to be serious. But I think the movie itself has so much of a serious quality, and it had at the time a high budget. It was kind of made with the intention of like reaching a bigger audience or a big audience, but it takes itself very very seriously, and I think that might be one of the reasons why it it might not work in some regards when something is dated. Whereas like in the expectation world, I feel like there's always some kind of tongue in cheek aspect to it where like even though they're taking it seriously, they're also not at the same time. And I think that's what it is. Like they're also I get the sense when I watch a really great low budget exploitation movie. In one facet, they're taking what they do, the craft really seriously, but it also has this tongue in cheek aspect, and they're not taking themselves seriously, and they're kind of laughing at themselves a little bit and having fun. Whereas Manhunter, it's all serious business, and it's got a big budget. So I don't know. I think that might be it why that happens. But there's certain aspects of the movie where I feel it is a little bit dated, and I kind of almost get taken out of the movie a little bit. It's weird. But that being said, I still think that the movie is awesome. I think it's Michael Mann's one of Michael Mann's best movies. Another movie I think that happens when I say movies that are I think are classics and kind of iconic, but there's certain aspects of them that are really dated. Brian De Palma's Scarface. I think that's a really good example of that. Amazing movie. I love that movie to death, and eventually I'll do a show on that. I think it's Al Pacino's one of his best performances. I think it's Brian De Palma's back in his primetime heyday of his career as a director. He was one of the greatest directors ever, and I think Scarface is probably one of his better movies. I think his best period was probably in the early '80s, late '70s. Dress to Kill, things like that. Like those are just masterpieces. But Scarface is an awesome movie, and I think it's a great movie. But again, there's certain things about that movie that are super bad. Like, and I attribute it to because of how dated it is at times. Um, that it's a little bit hard. That it does. I do when I watch that movie, even though I love it, because of those qualities, I get taken out of the movie. And I'm like, wow, like this is super cheesy, but not really in a cool way. It's weird. But I think that for me, that's a big example of that. I think Scarface, even though I love that movie to death, I think that movie has a little bit more of a dated quality. I think it's a little bit more dated than Manhunter, but it has similarities with that. It's funny. It's a real interesting, weird little thing. But Manhunter again is technically the first movie in the Silence of the Lambs franchise, if you want to call it a franchise, which it is. It was the first movie that came out, and it was adapted from the Red Dragon. And Manhunter, the first movie in the whole franchise of Silence of the Lambs, like I said, it was adapted from a novel that was called Red Dragon, and it was written by Thomas Harris. And Thomas Harris wrote Silence of the Lambs, and then he also wrote um, Hannibal. So famous novels. They were very successful, and all basically the first three movies are all adapted from these books. And Silence of the Lambs basically, well, the main characters in Silence of the Lambs, it it does follow. I do love the storyline, especially the first two, because it really does follow. You really do follow these characters, and they really do show kind of where their origins, where they started, and of course the iconic movie Silence of the Lambs itself stars Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter, who we all know and love, Jodie Foster, Clarence Starling, Ted Levine, who I think is one of the most underrated actors, but just amazing. I think this is one of the greatest roles ever. He plays Buffalo Bill, which I remember when I first saw Silence of the Lambs, and I just thought Buffalo Bill's character legitimately like terrified the shit out of me. Still does. I just think he's one of the greatest villains on the big screen in real life monsters. And it's always funny to me because Ted Levine, he's a real famous, pretty famous actor, and he's been in so many movies. And most of the times I've seen him in other movies, he always plays like a cop, or he's kind of almost got this like comedic role. And I always find it like super funny, and just ironic that he's known for playing one of the most frightening characters ever on the screen, and he plays this cop. There's a I remember seeing it a few years ago, and I'll probably watch it again. I'll track it down. But I remember a couple of years ago finding this really great interview with Ted Levine on YouTube, and he just talked about how his career and how he got picked to do this movie. Really great. And of course, Scott Glenn, who plays Jack Crawford. And Manhunter is basically the whole center of the story. Is basically Jack Crawford, who becomes the head of the FBI. He Manhunter is basically centered on Jack Crawford, and they go into detail about how Jack Crawford was the character who eventually caught Hannibal Lecter. And Hannibal Lecter, in the start of the movie, is in prison, and there's all this backstory. And Jack Crawford goes on to become the head of the FBI department that oversees trying to track down and create these profiles on serial killers. And he is kind of the head of this department, and he becomes Jodie Foster's boss. So it's interesting. And then Red Dragon, which was a movie that is basically a remake of Manhunter. But it does, I do want to watch it again. I probably will watch it again. But it's essentially a remake of Manhunter. It's good, but it's not great. It doesn't have the suspense or the creepiness of Manhunter. Um, Tom Noonan as the Red Dragon, or AKA the Tooth Fairy, is just completely frightening in that movie. Ray Fiennes plays him in Red Dragon, and he's really great. But I feel like the movie itself, it's always kind of, it's underwhelming. Like, it's good, but it doesn't have that intensity to it. I think it's a little bit more, not sanitized, but I just feel like the tension just isn't there. I kind of do want to watch it again. I do have it on DVD. Since I'm kind of thinking about this as a, more or less it's kind of turned into now a coverage of a franchise. But it's okay. It's okay. It's not great though, but it's nowhere near as good as Manhunter, or especially Silence of the Lambs, which I think is just an amazing movie. And after Silence of the Lambs, there was another movie called Hannibal, and basically it follows the storyline of where Hannibal Lecter and Jodie Foster's character basically kind of more or less fall in love. I guess the novel itself goes into that really heavily, which is I've always felt it's kind of like ridiculous and hard to buy, and they hint at that at the movie in the movie. And the movie itself isn't really. I felt like when Hannibal came out, I was excited to see it, but I felt like it was directed by Ridley Scott, and I felt like it was at one point Ridley Scott was just one of the best directors around, and I felt like when he directed, and I believe he was involved with the writing of Hannibal, and also stars Gary Oldman, and Gary Oldman's really awesome in it, but I felt when that movie came out, it was kind of the beginning of the end of what Ridley Scott was doing in his career. Like I felt like once he made that movie, his career went all over the place, and a lot of the movies he started making were just like not very good, and it just seemed to start this weird trend in his career where I felt like he lost the fire that he had. I don't know what it was. But really disappointing movie overall. It's so far fetched and silly, and it just really, with the established universe and the established kind of relationships that are created in the previous films, it just gets into this really it just goes into this really far fetched territory that's kind of ridiculous, and it doesn't work. And suddenly Hannibal Lecter is not really a frightening character anymore. I don't know. It's kind of a mess, that movie. And I do like Red Dragon. I'd say Red Dragon is better than Hannibal. I feel like Red Dragon's a little bit more fleshed out, a little bit more solid of a story, even though it's nowhere near as good as Silence of the Lambs or Manhunter, especially Silence. But I think it's pretty good. I think it's a little bit more cohesive and fleshed out, where Hannibal's really just kind of silly and kind of ridiculous and not really fleshed out as well. Not even really well directed. That was a really disappointing movie. But getting back to Silence of the Lambs, and I mentioned it when I did the show yesterday on Manhunter. Technically, I look at Silence of the Lambs as being a horror film. I definitely think it is, and for the most part, it is. It is regarded as a horror film, and I think historically, it's significant for what it's worth. It's really the only pretty much horror film that I know of that was fully recognized by the Academy Awards. Like it won every award. It won. Jonathan Demme won Best Director. Jodie Foster, Anthony Hopkins won Best Actor and Actress. It won Best Picture. It won every Academy Award when it came out, and it was nominated for everything. And ever since then, I've never. Now I feel, well, especially the last 10 or 15 years, but most horror films are completely ignored. And there's been some tremendous, examples of that. One I think that was a real travesty was Toni Collette's performance in Ari Aster's Hereditary, which I thought was just a powerhouse of a performance, and she wasn't even nominated for that movie. So since then, there hasn't been, as far as the genre of horror, which is my favorite genre, I haven't seen any, no acknowledgement by the Academy Awards, let alone any horror films actually winning an award, in that light. So, but Silence of the Lambs, I think, is generally one of the greatest suspense movies. Also, I think it's so incredibly suspenseful, ever written. I think it's one. I think it's easily one of the best films that deals with the portrayal of a serial killer. I mean, there's so much tension to the movie. The characters are just so incredible, and I feel like it's one of those movies. Like the minute you put it in, you're just like gripping the side of your chair. Like you can't stop watching it. I just think it's such an intense movie. It's such a great character. There's so many great characters in it. Jonathan Demme just did an amazing job directing it. It really, obviously put Anthony Hopkins on a map as one of the greatest actors ever, one of the most stunning performances ever on film. Um, I don't own any of these movies or any of the movies in the Friday 13th Silence of the Lambs franchise. I don't own any of the movies on Blu-ray, which is kind of weird. I do own. Well, actually, no. I take it back. I have. No, I actually don't. I only have them on DVD. I have a collector's edition of DVD of Silence of the Lambs, and then I have um, Red Dragon on DVD, and then Manhunter on DVD. I don't own them on Blu-ray. I'm not sure why. I need to probably do that. But I did. I every now and then when I go to Barnes and Nobles in Augusta, Augusta, Maine, they have an amazing collection of movies, but it's primarily focused on Criterion. Criterion is an amazing company where they released all of like they mostly start out releasing lots of art house films and foreign films and like American classics, but these amazing packages, amazing editions, and they release a lot of Blu-ray versions of all these films. Um, but they're really really expensive. That's why I do have pretty decent. I have maybe 5 to 7 Criterion Collection editions of some movies, but generally I don't own a lot of them because they're really expensive, like really expensive. And I remember being in the store fairly recently, and I was going through it, and they had a Silence of the Lambs um, Blu-ray 4K edition, all remastered, and I guess it had a bunch of special features on it. Like that would be amazing to own, but it was something like over $40, maybe almost $50, and it was 2 discs, I think. So they're so expensive. So that's one of the reasons I don't have it. Well, definitely the reason I don't have it on Criterion. But I've found too, I even Blu-ray editions for the film are considering that one Best Picture. I've I've been frustrated in that movie. I feel for Blu-ray and 4K releases has never been given a really great release. Maybe it does exist and I haven't seen it, but I haven't seen even on Blu-ray or 4K. I haven't seen a release of that film of where it's treated respectfully, meaning that where it's totally remastered, but it just doesn't have any. There's no bonus disc. There's no special features at all. It's all void of any of that, and I never understood why, because it's arguably one of the greatest movies ever made, and or not arguably, I think it really is, and but it's never gotten that treatment. So, but I'm sure it exists. I know this Criterion Collection does that, but I don't really want to spend close to $50 on one movie. But maybe someday I'll get it. But Silence of the Lambs, just a phenomenal classic. It always, I remember when I first saw it, it just terrified me, scared the crap out of me, and I still think that this movie still holds up. I still think it's just as riveting. And it's hard to believe it came out in '91. Just wild. And I think I was in 8th grade when it came out, and I remember seeing it as a kid when I was in 8th grade, and it just scared the crap out of me. But I just loved it. And in that year, of course, it won all all the Academy Awards. And it still remains today an amazing classic. It's iconic. It's one of the most iconic movies. I think it's the greatest roles, in for Anthony Hopkins is the best role he's ever played, and he's been in a bazillion movies since then and even before. And for Jodie Foster, I think you know she's been nominated many times. I think she's won other Academy Awards, and she's been in tons and tons of movies. And I think it's definitely the best role that she's ever been in. I just saw yesterday that she's actually in this new season for True Detective that's coming out. Um, which I'm not. I don't know. I think it looks okay. I'm I did a big show on the first season of True Detective, which is my favorite TV show, and I really don't. The rest of the there's two other seasons, not very good. This third one is actually really really good with Steven Dorff, and actually really like the third season, but the ending, the last season, like the last two shows, are so utterly terrible and so utterly disappointing and so utterly anticlimactic that I couldn't believe it, and I was like, this sucks, and I just was so disappointed with it, and there was all this build up, and it was just like, what? This is what it's about. This is what we're driving towards. So disappointing. It's really good up into if you get once you get up to the last two episodes. Again, it's so underwhelming and so disappointing, and it's kind of like a joke. All before that, it's really good though. I think it's a really good. The second season of True Detective is kind of terrible. It's okay at times, but it's so all over the place, and they can't really establish what's going on. You can't ever get your bearings with what they're trying to say or do with the show. Uh, but the third season, like again, it starts off really good, but then it's got this terrible ending. But there's this new season, like I just mentioned, that's coming out that stars Jodie Foster. It looks okay. It takes place in Alaska, and she's a detective, and there's like a series of all these people are disappearing. It looks okay, but I don't know. I'm not very excited by it. But I definitely think Silence is the greatest role of her. Of her long. She's been in some incredible movies, but I think it's definitely the best thing she's ever done, and she's never topped that kind of performance. But this is Jason Dean, so yeah. So stay tuned for some more movies coming your way. I'm not going to do any other of the movies in the franchise. I won't do a review on Hannibal, and I'm not going to do a review of Red Dragon. I'm not the TV show Hannibal. The TV show is actually really good, but I probably won't do a show on that just because I don't own it and I haven't seen it in a long time. It is really really good, but to me for this franchise, my favorite two are is definitely Manhunter and Silence of the Lambs. So I'm not gonna. I tend to, I try to only focus on movies that I'm really, really into. I don't really spend time doing negative reviews on movies I don't really like, or I try not to be too critical of that kind of thing. Um, Certain movies I'll see, I will do a review regardless, but generally I don't, and I try to only focus on doing movie reviews, or talking about movies that I generally really love. And so I'm not going to cover the other movies because they're not very good. Red Dragon being okay, decent, but not really worth doing a show on. But out of these two, I definitely say Silence of the Lambs is the best one. Manhunter is fantastic though too. I like them because they're both very very different. But I noticed the storylines are so cohesive. Um, I might do that tonight after I finish. I just started watching Manhunter again last night, and when I'm finished with that, I might watch Silence right after that, which I've never done before. But I noticed the storyline is really seamless, and that's one of the things I love about it, is just how cohesive both of those films are, even though they're very very different. Yeah. So this is Jason Dean. So thanks again for your support, and definitely check out. I mean, Silence of the Lambs is one of the most talked about movies and one of the most popular movies out there in the universe. So if you haven't seen it, I don't know what's wrong with you, but just a great movie. I know a lot of people have not seen Manhunter. A lot of people don't know about that movie, and I'm always surprised. But there's a lot of folks out there. I like the show yesterday. I posted it around, and I had a few people comment that they've never seen it before. Silence of the Lambs not the case, but Manhunter, it's a little bit more obscure, and but check them both out. Amazing. So this is Jason Dean. If you like this channel, please like and subscribe, and keep the comments coming. And we'll see you next time. Peace.